The night was cold, and the rain fell in relentless sheets, drumming against the empty streets like a song of sorrow. A single father hurried home, clutching his umbrella, his mind weighed down by bills, responsibilities, and the silent prayers he whispered for a better tomorrow. But as he turned the corner, he froze. There, beneath a flickering streetlight, sat a young nurse in drenched scrubs, her shoulders trembling as she buried her face in her hands. She was crying, alone, broken, and lost. He had no idea that this stranger had just lost everything she once held dear, clinging only to the fragile thread of hope. And in that fleeting moment, as their paths crossed by chance, neither of them knew that this encounter would change both of their lives forever. The rain was falling harder than ever, a heavy curtain that blurred the glow of streetlights and turned the narrow lanes into rivers of silver. Inside his mind, the single dad carried storms of his own, quiet storms that never seemed to end. Every day was a battle, from getting his little daughter ready for school to stretching every last coin in his pocket so she would not go to bed hungry. He had long since grown used to carrying burdens that seemed heavier than his shoulders could bear. But he never allowed himself to stumble. His daughter's innocent smile was the anchor that kept him steady, even when life's waves tried to pull him under. Yet that night, as the rain soaked through his coat and his steps quickened toward home, he could not help but feel the exhaustion sinking into his bones. There was rent overdue, electricity bills piling up, and a broken washing machine waiting for him in the corner of their tiny apartment. He had already done all he could to stretch his income from the mechanic's workshop, but no matter how hard he worked, it never seemed enough. As he hurried through the street, his umbrella tilted against the wind, he suddenly noticed a figure beneath the dim flicker of a streetlight. At first, he thought it was just another passerby, trying to shield themselves from the storm, but as he drew closer, the sight stopped him cold. A young woman sat on the curb, soaked through to the skin, her hospital scrubs clinging tightly to her frame. Her hair was plastered against her face, and in her trembling hands, she covered her eyes as tears blended with the rain. For a moment, he hesitated. He was tired. His own worries weighed him down, and he had never been one to meddle in the affairs of strangers. But something about the fragility in her posture struck a chord deep inside him. She looked like someone who had not only lost her way home, but had lost everything that once defined her. He tightened his grip on the umbrella and stepped forward. "Miss, are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice almost swallowed by the rain. The woman flinched as though she had been pulled out of a nightmare, her red-rimmed eyes lifting to meet his. For a second, he saw a storm behind them, the kind of storm that could shatter a soul. She tried to force a smile, shaking her head, as if to assure him she was fine, but her trembling body betrayed her. He could have walked away. He could have told himself he had done his part, that his daughter was waiting at home, and his time was too precious to be spent on strangers. But he couldn't. Something inside him refused to let him leave her there, crying in the cold rain. He remembered his late wife in those eyes, remembered the helplessness of holding someone fragile and broken, wishing he could take away their pain. With a quiet sigh, he closed his umbrella and held it above her instead, letting the rain soak his own shoulders while she remained shielded. "You'll catch a fever if you stay out here like this," he said, his tone more firm now. Do you need somewhere warm? At least until the rain eases." The nurse blinked at him, her lips parting but no words forming. She looked torn between pride and desperation, between refusing a stranger's kindness and accepting the lifeline she so clearly needed. Finally, she whispered, her voice breaking, I don't have anywhere to go." The words struck him harder than the rain. No place to go. How terrifyingly familiar those words sounded, echoing in his own past, when he had almost lost everything after his wife's passing. Without thinking, he extended his hand to her. She hesitated, staring at it as though it were both salvation and danger, but when her own shivering fingers finally touched his, he tightened his grip gently, helping her rise from the cold, wet ground. They walked in silence toward his small apartment, the umbrella barely shielding them both. He could feel her exhaustion in every step, the weight of invisible battles clinging to her. His mind wrestled with questions. Who was she? What had happened to leave her like this? Why did she look like she had been carrying grief heavier than her fragile frame could bear? Yet he did not ask. Sometimes silence was kinder than questions. When they finally reached his apartment, he unlocked the door quietly, mindful not to wake his daughter, who was already asleep inside. The warm air inside greeted them like a gentle embrace compared to the chill outside. He handed her a towel and gestured toward the couch. She accepted with a small nod, her eyes still avoiding his, as though she were ashamed of needing help. He busied himself in the kitchen, boiling water for tea, partly because he wanted to offer her comfort, and partly because he needed a moment to steady his own emotions. When he finally returned with 2 steaming cups, she whispered a faint, "Thank you," her voice almost drowned by the hum of the rain outside. He sat across from her, studying her as she wrapped her hands around the cup for warmth. She looked so out of place there. Her scrubs a reminder of the life she once had, the life she might have lost. "You don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to," he said gently. "But sometimes, it helps to know you're not alone." Her eyes filled again, tears spilling despite her effort to hold them back. She pressed her lips together, shaking her head. "I thought I could handle everything," she whispered. "But tonight, I realized I have nothing left." His chest tightened at her words. He understood them too well. The pain of losing everything, the crushing loneliness that followed. In her brokenness, he saw a reflection of himself not so long ago. Perhaps that was why he couldn't walk past her in the rain. Why he felt a strange pull toward protecting her, even when his own life was already stretched thin. Compassion wasn't about having enough to give, it was about giving even when you had little left. And as he sat there, watching her try to hold herself together, he knew one thing for certain. This night, this encounter was more than chance. It was 2 broken souls crossing paths, each carrying wounds that the world couldn't see. And maybe, just maybe, by offering her a place to rest, he was also giving himself something he hadn't dared to hope for in years. Connection, and the possibility of healing. The rain had stopped by morning, but the storm inside her heart lingered, heavier than any downpour. She sat quietly on the couch, wrapped in the single dad's old blanket, the faint aroma of tea still clinging to the room. Her scrubs were now dry, though they bore the marks of a long, endless night. She stared at her hands, her fingers fidgeting, as if searching for answers that were no longer there. Once these hands had carried hope. They had saved lives, comforted patients, and held on to dreams of building something meaningful. Now, they trembled as if the weight of the world had broken them. Her story began long before the rain. She had been a nurse, respected in her ward, loved by her patients, and trusted by her colleagues. Each morning, she wore her uniform with pride, believing she was doing something that mattered. But life has a way of unraveling when you least expect it. It started with her mother's sudden illness, an illness that drained every bit of her savings as treatments piled up. She had worked double shifts, sometimes going days without proper sleep, just to pay for the medicines that kept her mother alive. But even her dedication wasn't enough to stop the inevitable. When her mother passed away, the small apartment they had shared became unbearably empty, a hollow reminder of everything she had lost. After the funeral, she returned to her work, throwing herself into caring for strangers, because it was the only way she could numb the pain. But grief doesn't stay hidden forever. Mistakes crept in, small at first, but enough for her supervisor to notice. A misfiled report, a missed dose, a late arrival after sleepless nights of crying. The hospital that once felt like a second home became a place where whispers followed her, where pity disguised itself as professionalism. It wasn't long before she was called into the office and told to take an indefinite leave. The words had cut sharper than any knife. Without her job, without her mother, without stability, she was left adrift. For weeks she tried to hold on. She applied for other positions, but rejection letters piled up. She sold whatever little she had of value, her mother's jewelry, her own textbooks, even her small collection of keepsakes from childhood. Slowly, piece by piece, her life shrank until she had nothing left. The final blow came when she could no longer afford rent. The landlord's firm voice still echoed in her ears, cold and unbending, as he handed her the eviction notice. She had walked out with just a bag of clothes, her scrubs, and a heart too heavy to carry. That night, as the rain poured down, she had nowhere to go, no one to call. Friends had their own lives, their own struggles, and pride had kept her from asking for help. So she sat under the flickering streetlight, letting the storm outside match the one inside, until exhaustion broke her and tears flowed freely. It was there that the single dad had found her, though she hadn't realized in that moment how much his kindness would mean. Now, in the quiet of his modest apartment, she looked around at the signs of his own struggles, the peeling paint on the walls, the patched-up couch she sat on, the faint hum of an old refrigerator that had seen better years. Yet despite this simplicity, there was warmth here, a warmth she had not felt in a long time. On the small table near the window, she noticed a child's drawing, a crayon sketch of a man and a little girl holding hands under a bright sun. Her chest tightened at the sight, because it was proof that even in hardship, love could bloom. The man entered the room, carrying a tray with bread and a boiled egg, the simplest of meals, yet offered with sincerity. She tried to protest, saying she couldn't accept more from him, but he shook his head. "It's not much," he said softly, "but it'll help you feel better." She bit her lip, fighting back tears. She hadn't eaten properly in days, and the kindness behind his words made her hunger impossible to deny. As she ate, silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. He didn't ask for details she wasn't ready to share. He simply sat nearby, sipping his own tea, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. Finally, she found herself whispering the words she had kept locked inside for too long. I used to think I was strong. I thought if I just worked hard enough, cared enough, everything would stay together. But now, I don't even know who I am without all the things I lost. The confession hung in the air, fragile and trembling. He set his cup down, leaning slightly closer. You're still you, he said with gentle firmness. Losing things doesn't mean losing yourself. It just means you're carrying scars now. And scars, they don't make you weaker. They prove you survived. His words pierced through her like light breaking through storm clouds. She looked at him, really looked, and saw in his eyes the same pain she carried. He wasn't a stranger untouched by hardship. He was someone who understood. Someone who had walked through his own storms and kept moving forward for the sake of his child. That realization softened something inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to walk alone anymore. Her heart ached as memories of her mother flashed before her eyes. The gentle way she used to brush her hair, the warmth of her laughter. She had promised her mother she would live bravely, yet here she was, broken in a stranger's home. But perhaps this was where bravery began. Not in carrying everything alone until it crushed her, but in accepting a hand when it was offered. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. It was fragile, delicate, almost too small to notice, but it was there. And it had come not from wealth, or stability, or success, but from the simple kindness of a man who had nothing more to give than his humanity. She wrapped her fingers tighter around the warm cup of tea, inhaling deeply as if to steady herself. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be rejection, hardship, and nights of doubt. But she also knew that sometimes life brought people together at the exact moment they needed each other most. And maybe this was one of those moments. As the rain outside softened into a gentle drizzle, she looked at the man and whispered a quiet, heartfelt, "Thank you." He only nodded, his gaze steady, his presence unwavering. And in that silence, an unspoken bond formed between them. The bond of two wounded souls who had found, in each other's brokenness, the strength to begin again.